In the heart of the wild, ancient forest, a shadow moved with sinister purpose. The poacher, a man hardened by greed and cruelty, stalked through the underbrush, his rifle at the ready. He had come seeking the ultimate prize, a majestic bear whose pelt would fetch a fortune on the black market. For weeks, he had tracked the elusive creature, following its trail with a relentless determination. The poacher fancied himself a master hunter, a man who could outsmart any beast, but he failed to understand the true nature of the wilderness he had invaded. The forest was more than just trees and animals. It was a living, breathing entity with a will of its own. As he pushed deeper into the woods, the poacher's overconfidence dulled his senses. He did not notice the eerie stillness that had fallen over the forest, nor the watchful eyes that followed his every move. For the bear he hunted was no ordinary animal. It was a guardian of the wild, a creature that had survived countless encounters with hunters like him. And now it was the one doing the hunting. Unaware of the danger that lurked in the shadows, the poacher pressed on. He had come too far to turn back now, driven by an insatiable greed for the bear's precious hide. Little did he know that the very prize he sought would be his undoing. Deep within the forest's ancient heart, the bear watched and waited. It had sensed the poacher's presence long before he had entered its domain, catching the acrid scent of gunpowder and human sweat on the breeze. The great beast knew this intruder meant harm to the delicate balance of the woodland realm. For generations, the bear had roamed these woods, a silent sentinel guarding against those who would exploit and destroy. It had seen the devastation wrought by human hands, the scars left by logging, the animals snared in cruel traps, and it had learned to fight back, to become a hunter of hunters. With each passing day, the bear shadowed the poacher, studying his movements and patterns. It was a game of cat and mouse, a deadly dance in which only one would emerge victorious. The creature bided its time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The poacher grew increasingly frustrated as the days wore on with no sign of his quarry. He had underestimated the cunning of the bear, believing it to be just another dumb animal to be brought down by his superior intellect and firepower. But the forest had its own wisdom, far older and deeper than any human understanding. As he made camp one evening, the poacher felt a prickling unease at the back of his neck. The woods had grown unnaturally quiet, the usual chatter of birds and insects replaced by an oppressive silence. He shrugged off the feeling, telling himself it was just nerves. After all, he was the apex predator here, not some overgrown furball. But the bear was close now, its massive form concealed in the gathering shadows. It had caught the scent of the poacher's campfire, the aroma of roasting meat making its mouth water. Yet this was no mere hunger that drove the great beast. It was a primal urge to protect its forest home from those who would defile it. The creature's eyes glinted in the fading light, twin pools of ancient wisdom and untamed ferocity. It watched as the poacher settled in for the night, oblivious to the danger that lurked just beyond the firelight's glow. Soon, very soon, the hunt would end, and the poacher would learn the true meaning of wilderness justice. As dawn broke over the forest, the poacher awoke with a start. Something felt different about the woods this morning, an electric tension that hung heavy in the air. He quickly broke camp, eager to resume his pursuit of the elusive bear. Little did he realize that the hunter had now become the hunted. The bear had spent the night watching, waiting for the perfect moment to make its move. It knew these woods like no other creature, every hidden trail and secret glade etched into its ancestral memory. With a stealth that belied its great size, the bear began to stalk the poacher through the underbrush. Its paws made no sound on the forest floor, its breathing slow and steady. The creature was in no hurry. It knew that patience was the key to a successful hunt. As the morning wore on, the poacher began to sense that something was amiss. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, a primal warning of unseen danger. He spun around, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. But the bear was a master of camouflage, its shaggy coat blending seamlessly with the dappled shadows. Unnerved, the poacher quickened his pace. He told himself it was just his imagination playing tricks on him, that there was nothing out there but birds and squirrels. But deep down, he knew he was no longer the predator in this game. He had crossed a line by entering the bear's domain, and now he would pay the price. The sun climbed higher in the sky as the deadly game of cat and mouse continued. The poacher's nerves were stretched to breaking point, every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves sending jolts of fear down his spine. He knew he was being hunted now, but by what, he couldn't say. Meanwhile, the bear continued its relentless pursuit. It could smell the poacher's fear now, a sharp tang mixed with the sour odor of old sweat. The creature's predatory instincts surged to the fore, an ancient hunger awakening deep within its belly. As it closed in on its prey, the bear let out a low, rumbling growl. The sound echoed through the forest, a warning that death was coming on silent paws. The poacher froze mid-stride, his blood turning to ice in his veins. He had heard that sound before, in his darkest nightmares, the growl of an apex predator on the hunt. Panic overtook him then, a primal terror that sent him crashing blindly through the undergrowth. Branches whipped at his face, thorns tore at his clothes, but still he ran. He had to get away, had to escape this cursed forest before it claimed his life. But there was no escape from the bear's judgment. It had decreed that this intruder must pay for his crimes against nature, and pay he would in blood and pain and terror. The great beast quickened its pace, its powerful muscles rippling beneath its shaggy coat. The hunt was nearing its end now, and only one would walk away alive. The poacher's flight took him deeper into the forest's ancient heart, far from any hope of rescue or respite. His lungs burned with each gasping breath. His legs trembled with exhaustion, but still he ran. Far behind him, he could hear it, that steady, relentless tread, getting closer with every passing second. He had given up any hope of bagging the bear now. All he wanted was to escape with his life. But these woods were a labyrinth of twisted paths and hidden snares, and he was lost in more ways than one. As he stumbled into a small clearing, the poacher realized his mistake too late. He had blundered into a natural dead end, a narrow ravine walled in by sheer cliffs. There would be no going forward and no going back. Slowly, he turned to face his pursuer. The bear loomed at the edge of the clearing, a massive silhouette against the greenery. Its eyes blazed with a primal fury, an ancient rage against all who would defile this sacred place. For a moment, man and beast regarded each other in silence. The poacher's hand inched toward his rifle, but he knew it was futile. This was no mere animal. This was nature's vengeance incarnate. With a roar that shook the earth, the bear charged. The poacher screamed as the creature's bulk slammed into him, crushing him against the unyielding stone. Claws like knives shredded his flesh, teeth like sabers pierced his throat. The forest watched in grim satisfaction as the poacher breathed his last. Justice had been served and the balance restored. The bear, its grim task complete, melted back into the shadows. And the forest remembered, forever and always, the price of man's folly. As the bear disappeared into the underbrush, the forest itself seemed to exhale a sigh of relief. The threat had been eliminated, the intruder vanquished, and peace could reign once more in this ancient, primal place. But the bear knew that its work was far from done. There would always be others like the poacher, men who saw the wilderness as something to be conquered, exploited, destroyed. And as long as they came, the bear would be there to meet them, a silent, implacable guardian of all that was wild and free. For the creature understood the delicate balance that governed life in the forest, the intricate web of relationships between predator and prey, flora and fauna. It was a balance that had existed since time immemorial, and one that must be protected at all costs. As it roamed deeper into the woods, the bear passed by the signs of its forest kin, the delicate tracks of deer, the gnawed stumps of beaver dams, the soaring nests of eagles. Each played their part in the great cycle of life, and each was precious in its own way. But there were other signs, two signs of man's destructive touch. The scars of old logging roads, the rusting remains of abandoned machinery, the acrid tang of pollution on the breeze. These were reminders of the constant threat that loomed over the forest, a threat that only vigilance and strength could keep at bay. And so the bear continued its eternal patrol, a lone sentinel standing watch over the wilderness. It knew that its task would never be done, but it also knew that it would never surrender. For this was its home, its hearth and its haven, and it would defend it to the last breath, no matter the cost. As the seasons turned and the years passed, the legend of the bear grew among the creatures of the forest. They spoke of it in hushed whispers, a great and terrible guardian who walked the shadows, ever watchful for those who would do harm to the wild places. Many had glimpsed it from afar, a shaggy silhouette moving through the trees, eyes glinting in the dappled sunlight. Some even claimed to have seen it up close, a massive, powerful beast with a gaze that seemed to pierce the very soul. But none could say for certain what drove the bear, what ancient pact or primal duty bound it to this ceaseless vigil. Some whispered that it was the spirit of the forest itself, given fleshy form to defend its domain against all who would despoil it. Others spoke of an ancient wrong that must be righted, a crime against nature that had left a stain upon the land, a wound that only the bear's tireless guardianship could heal. But all agreed on one thing, that the bear was a force to be reckoned with, a power not to be trifled with by mortal men. And so the seasons turned, and the forest flourished under the bear's watchful eye. The great cycles of life continued unabated, birth and death, growth and decay, all woven together in an intricate dance as old as time itself. But even as it reveled in the beauty and richness of its domain, the bear never forgot the threats that lurked beyond the tree line. It knew that man's greed and hubris knew no bounds, and that vigilance was the price of freedom in an uncertain world. And so it watched and waited, a silent sentinel standing guard over all that was green and growing. For this was its sacred charge, to protect and defend, to nurture and sustain. And though the road ahead might be long and hard, the bear would walk it to the end, for the sake of the forest, and all who called it home. As the bear patrolled its domain, it began to sense a change in the air, a subtle shift in the balance of power that governed the forest. It was a change that had been brewing for years, a slow, inexorable creep of man's influence into the wild places. At first, it was little things, a few more hikers on the trails, a few more campsites in the clearings. But as time passed, the signs grew more ominous. Logging trucks rumbled down old forest roads, leaving scars of muddy devastation in their wake. Surveyors and prospectors poked and prodded at the land, seeking hidden treasures to exploit and extract. The bear watched it all with growing unease. It knew that this was the beginning of the end, the first fateful steps down a path that could only lead to ruin. For once man's machines and ambitions took hold, there would be no going back, no way to unwind the clock and restore what had been lost. And so the bear redoubled its efforts, patrolling farther and wider, marking its territory with greater vigilance. It sought out the dens and nests of its fellow creatures, warning them of the danger that lurked on the horizon. And it watched the interlopers with a wary eye, ready to strike at the first sign of true threat. But even as it struggled to hold the line, the bear knew that it was fighting a losing battle. For every acre it protected, 10 more were lost to the inexorable march of progress. Every stream it kept pristine was matched by a dozen choked with silt and debris. And yet, the bear refused to give in to despair. It knew that even in the darkest of times, there was still hope, still a chance for the wild places to endure, if only the guardians remained true to their charge. And so it soldiered on, a lone warrior standing against the tide, a bulwark against the forces that would consume all in their path. For this was its duty, its calling, and its creed. And though the road ahead might be dark and uncertain, the bear would walk it to the end, for the sake of the forest, and all who called it home. As the threats to the forest grew more dire, the bear began to sense a change within itself as well, a stirring of some ancient, primal power that had lain dormant for generations. It was a power born of the land itself, a deep, abiding connection to the very essence of the wild. At first, the bear did not understand this power, did not know how to harness or control it. But as it spent more time in quiet communion with the forest, listening to the whispers of the wind and the murmurs of the trees, it began to hear the land's voice more clearly. And what it heard was a call to action, a summons to rise up and defend the wild places with all the strength and fury of a mother grizzly protecting her cubs. For the land knew that the bear was its chosen champion, the one creature in all the forest who could turn the tide against the forces of destruction. And so the bear embraced its destiny, drawing upon the power of the land to fuel its efforts, to lend strength to its limbs and courage to its heart. It became a force of nature unto itself, a living embodiment of the wilderness's raw, untamed spirit. With this newfound power, the bear redoubled its efforts to protect the forest, seeking out the most vulnerable places and creatures, standing guard over them with a fierce and unwavering devotion. It became a legend among the animals of the woods, a guardian spirit whose very presence could make the bravest of predators think twice. And yet, even as it reveled in its newfound strength, the bear knew that the battle was far from won. For every victory it achieved was matched by a dozen setbacks. Every acre saved was balanced by 100 lost. But still, the bear refused to lose hope. It knew that as long as there were wild places left to defend, it would never stop fighting, never stop striving to protect and preserve the land that had given it life and purpose. And so it pressed on, a tireless sentinel standing watch over the wilderness, a living testament to the enduring power of nature's spirit. For this was its sacred charge, to guard and defend, to nurture and sustain. And though the road ahead might be long and hard, the bear would walk it to the end, for the sake of the forest and all who called it home. As the bear's legend grew, it began to attract the attention of others who shared its devotion to the wild places. Humans who had not forgotten the old ways, the ancient pact between man and nature. They came from far and wide, rangers and conservationists, activists and eco-warriors, drawn by the stories of the great bear who walked the shadows. At first, the bear was wary of these newcomers, suspicious of any human presence in its domain. But as it watched them work, planting trees, clearing trails, standing up to the loggers and miners, it began to see them in a new light. These were not the destroyers it had come to know, the greedy, grasping men who saw the forest only as a resource to be exploited. No, these were kindred spirits, allies in the fight to protect and preserve the wild places. And so the bear began to work with them, guiding them to the places that needed the most help, lending its strength to their efforts. Together, they fought back against the tide of destruction, replanting clear-cut hillsides, restoring polluted streams, blocking the paths of bulldozers and chainsaws. It was a long and difficult struggle, a battle against entrenched interests and powerful foes. But slowly, inch by inch, they began to turn the tide. New forests sprang up where once there had been only stumps and slash. Here is the rest of the story. Rivers ran clear and cold once more, and the animals of the forest, from the tiniest mouse to the mightiest elk, found shelter and sustenance in the renewed wilderness. As the years passed, the bear grew old and gray, its once mighty limbs stiffened by age, its eyes dimmed by the passage of time. But even in its twilight years, it never stopped fighting, never stopped defending the land that had given it purpose and meaning. And though it knew that its own time was drawing to a close, the bear took comfort in the knowledge that its work would endure, that the seeds it had planted would continue to grow and flourish long after it was gone. For the bear had seen the change that was coming, the slow, steady shift in human hearts and minds. More and more, people were beginning to see the value of the wild places, the beauty and majesty of the untamed wilderness. They were starting to understand that the forest was not just a resource to be exploited, but a living, breathing thing with a spirit and a soul of its own. And so, even as its own strength faded, the bear knew that the fight would go on, that new champions would rise up to take its place, to carry on the work that it had begun so long ago. In the end, the bear passed quietly in the night, curled up in its den beneath the ancient pines, its spirit slipping away like mist on the morning breeze. But even in death, it left a legacy that would endure for generations, a testament to the enduring power of nature's guardians. For the creatures of the forest, the ones who had known the bear in life, mourned its passing with a deep and abiding sorrow. They gathered around its resting place in silent vigil, heads bowed in reverence for the great warrior who had given so much to defend their home. And even the humans who had fought alongside the bear, the rangers and activists who had been its allies in the long struggle, wept tears of grief and gratitude. For they knew that they had lost not just a comrade, but a symbol, a living embodiment of the wild spirit that had brought them all together. But even as they mourned, they knew that the bear's work was not finished, that the fight to protect the wilderness would go on, as long as there were those willing to take up its call. And so, as the seasons turned and the years passed, the legend of the Great Bear only grew, whispered around campfires and passed down through generations. It became a symbol of hope and resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was still a chance for the wild places to endure. For the bear had shown them the way, had taught them that the fight for the forest was not a battle to be won, but a journey to be taken. That true stewardship of the land was not about domination or exploitation, but about humility and respect, about learning to live in harmony with the rhythms and cycles of the natural world. And though the road ahead was long and the challenges many, those who walked in the bear's footsteps knew that they were not alone, that they were part of something greater than themselves, a community of kindred spirits bound together by a shared love of the wild. And so, as the sun rose over the forest each morning, they set out once more, rangers and activists, scientists and storytellers, ready to take up the bear's mantle and continue the work that it had begun. For they knew that the wilderness was a gift, a sacred trust passed down through the ages, and that as long as there were those willing to fight for it, to speak for it, to stand up for the wild places and the creatures who called them home, there would always be hope for the future, always a chance for life to find a way. Years turned into decades and decades into centuries. The world changed in ways both wondrous and terrible. Great cities rose and fell. Mighty empires clashed and crumbled. But through it all, the forest endured, a wild and untamed place, a refuge for all those who sought solace in the embrace of nature. And though the bear was gone, its spirit lived on in the hearts of all those who had known it, and in the very fabric of the wilderness itself. For the creature had left a mark upon the land, a legacy of courage and sacrifice, of love and devotion. Those who walked the forest trails could feel its presence still, a watchful, benevolent force that seemed to guide their steps and guard their passage. They spoke of it in reverent whispers, the great bear of legend, the guardian of the wild places. As generations came and went, the stories of the bear's deeds grew and changed, embellished by time and retelling. Some said that it had been a spirit of the forest itself, an ancient and powerful being who had taken on flesh and form to defend its domain. Others claimed that it had been a messenger from the gods, sent to remind humanity of its place in the grand design. But to those who truly understood, the rangers and activists, the scientists and storytellers, the truth was simpler and yet more profound. The bear had been a creature of flesh and blood, yes, but it had also been something more, a symbol of the wild spirit that lived within all things, the fierce and indomitable essence of life itself. And so they honored its memory in their own quiet ways, planting trees in its name, setting aside land in its honor, working to educate and inspire new generations of stewards and defenders. They knew that the fight for the wilderness would never truly be won, that there would always be new threats to face, new challenges to overcome. But they also knew that they were not alone in their struggle, that they were part of something greater than themselves, a vast and intricate web of life that stretched across the very face of the earth itself. And as long as they held true to that sacred trust, as long as they fought with the courage and devotion of the Great Bear itself, then there would always be hope for the future, always a chance for the wild places to endure, for beauty and wonder to triumph over darkness and despair. The bear had shown them the way, had given them a legacy to uphold and a dream to chase. And though the road ahead was long and the path uncertain, they knew that they would walk it to the very end, for the sake of the forest, and for all the generations yet to come. As the years stretched into centuries, the legend of the bear took on a life of its own, transcending the boundaries of the forest and spreading to every corner of the land. Bards and poets sang of its deeds, weaving tapestries of words that captured the essence of its courage and sacrifice. Artists and sculptors rendered its likeness in every medium, from delicate watercolors to towering monuments of stone. And in the hearts of the people, the bear became more than just a story, more than just a symbol of a bygone age. It became a guiding light, a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed filled with darkness and despair. For the bear's legacy was one of resilience and determination, of the unquenchable spirit that burned within all living things. It reminded them that no matter how great the odds, no matter how daunting the challenge, there was always a way forward, always a path to be forged through the wilderness of the soul. And so, as the world continued to change and evolve, as new wonders and new horrors emerged with each passing age, the bear's spirit endured, a constant reminder of the deep and abiding connection between all living things. In the great cities that rose from the ashes of the old world, children whispered its name in their games and in their dreams. In the vast and untamed wilderness that still remained, lone wanderers and intrepid explorers invoked its protection and its guidance. And in the hearts of those who worked to protect and preserve the wild places, the activists and the scientists, the rangers and the storytellers, the bear's memory burned like an unquenchable flame, a constant reminder of the great and sacred trust that had been placed in their hands. They knew that they were not just fighting for the forest, not just for the trees and the rivers, the mountains and the meadows. They were fighting for something far greater, for the very soul of the earth itself, for the right of all living things to flourish and thrive in the face of an uncertain future. And though the challenges they faced were great, though the road ahead was long and the path unclear, they drew strength from the bear's example, from the courage and the devotion that had defined its life and its legend. They planted forests in its name, vast and verdant swaths of green that stretched across the land like a living tapestry. They set aside great tracts of wilderness in its honor, sacred places where the wild things could roam free and untrammeled. They worked to educate and inspire new generations of stewards and defenders, passing on the bear's legacy like a torch from one hand to the next. And as they labored and struggled, as they fought and dreamed, they began to see the fruits of their efforts take root and flourish. Slowly, inch by inch, the tide began to turn. The forests grew and expanded. The rivers ran clean and clear. The air was filled with the songs of birds and the rustle of leaves, the earth bursting with new life and new possibility. It was a long and difficult road, a journey that spanned generations and tested the limits of their resolve. But through it all, they held fast to the bear's memory, to the fierce and indomitable spirit that had guided them through the darkest of times. And as they looked to the future, to the challenges and the opportunities that lay ahead, they knew that they would never be alone. For the bear was with them always, a constant presence, a guiding light in the wilderness of an ever-changing world. And so, as the sun rose and set, as the seasons turned and the years rolled on, they continued their work, their great and noble calling. They were the guardians of the wild places, the protectors of the earth's most precious treasures. And though the road ahead was long, though the path was fraught with peril and uncertainty, they would walk it to the very end for the sake of the bear and for the sake of all the generations yet to come. The end.